Welcome to the Atom Ventures podcast. My name is Bhairav Patel. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Atom Ventures, and today I'm here with Ben Ivey from the Entrepreneur Lifestyle. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Bhairav. It's a pleasure to see you.
So we're going to talk about a range of different things. We'll talk about entrepreneur lifestyle. We'll talk a little bit about your career. It's quite interesting and varied. China seems to be an interesting for you as well. And you have a huge amount of content and wealth of information that you pump out. So there's loads of different topics that we can touch on, I'm sure. So firstly, to set a little bit of background, can you tell people a little bit about yourself and, what is the entrepreneur lifestyle? How did you come about founding it?
Sure, fantastic. So my entrepreneurial journey started when I was in school, really, diving into university. And I started my first couple of businesses doing import-export and things like that. Then I had an opportunity to go to Silicon Valley, and I started to expand my business out there. And I was doing virtual reality to help people learn. And then I actually had a massive life-changing incident in that my father committed suicide. And for me, that was completely just changing in the way that I viewed the world, my perspective, and everything that I was doing at the time. So what I ended up doing was quitting my business in Silicon Valley. And I ended up searching for what is it that really drives us in life. My dad, too, was an entrepreneur. And I wanted to understand why we as entrepreneurs create these parallel worlds. And I guess really the question is, how does that happen? And how do we as entrepreneurs deal with overwhelm and stress and pressure without going inward and feeling depressed and practically suicidal when we're facing all these huge challenges in our lives? So since then, as you mentioned, I've been doing talks out in China for many years. I'm sure we'll chat about the TEDx I did in Chinese a little later on. But ultimately for me, when I came up with a vision for entrepreneur lifestyle, it was very simple. I wanted to debug that question of, can you live a great lifestyle whilst you build your business? For me, I wanted to support entrepreneurs so that they enjoy the journey, so that they're being incredibly productive, getting things done, but they're working smart and not busy. And for me, that's been a fantastic opportunity to help entrepreneurs view their business in a different way, to build it in a way that sets them up for success, and ultimately live an incredible lifestyle whilst they're building the business of their dreams.
Yeah, and I think that is the dream, right? That's the holy grail of everyone when they start to run a business. They basically feel that they're going to be able to make money quickly, sit on the beach, and do nothing. And then the reality bites the way you started out is the way you think you'll start out is not actually how you start out. So, yes. I mean, one of the things that is a theme running through a lot of the podcasts that we have now is that transition from work to entrepreneurship, right? And yes. So when you're talking to founders now at the moment, what are you saying to prepare them for that? Because a lot of people feel that they don't have what it takes, or they fear the jump. What is your advice to people when they're looking to say, okay, I want to start a business?
Sure. So I think ultimately it's understanding where you are in life, because everyone's at different life stages. And for some people, they want to have a year runaway line whereby they can go for a year without earning any money. And for them, that's what they need. And then they want to start. For others, it's, I want to dive straight in and I want to make it happen. I think ultimately what really stops us is our procrastination. And sometimes we feel like we're not good enough. Can I do it? And it's those questions that can lead entrepreneurs on a downward spiral. So what I often do with entrepreneurs is I challenge them to think, what is the worst that can actually happen to you? And when we think of the worst case scenario, okay, so I fail, okay, then what? You live with your parents? Okay, then what? And you're like, well, then I'd probably start again, get a job. And you start to think about, what are you actually scared of? And a lot of entrepreneurs are very much scared of that failure. They're scared of being seen as not good enough. And ultimately, it's those excuses that stop them moving forward. So for me, it's understanding what are their excuses and to figure out how do they overcome that so they can ultimately start to build a business that they want.
But I think a lot of what, I definitely hear what you're saying, but I think a lot of what people fear is very real, right? In the sense that, yes, okay, you may not make it and they may need to go find a job, but especially let's say in this market, finding a job would be a bit of a pain, and then losing, essentially a lot of money is lost as well, right? There's so many stories out there of people, I mean, friends of mine who've sold their couches and literally lived in a room with nothing in it because I had to sell everything. And so that's, I think, the realism that people don't understand. And it is something that will affect you in many different levels, right? It affects your friendships, affects your mental state, affects, your relationship with family, whatever it is. It permeates your entire being in a way.
Yeah, most certainly.
And so the question, I guess, for you is that how can you prepare people for that deep dive, right? Because it's if you're chugging along and you're working in a business and you are collecting a salary and, okay, you feel that you should be doing more and you want to do more. Okay, there is that part, the imposter syndrome that kicks in.
Sure.
So firstly, how do you tackle that bit? But
Yes.
secondly, how do you prepare them for the actual reality that, you may need to sell your car if you want to keep the business going?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, there's a few different facets there that we can dive into. When we look into imposter syndrome, and I work with business owners who have multi-million-dollar companies and they still feel like they have imposter syndrome. I think ultimately the best way to overcome that, and I was speaking yesterday on a podcast, and what I say is, when we think about who we must become in the future to live the life we want, right? Often business owners feel that there's that gap. Well, I can't be that inspirational business owner. Like, that's so far away from where I am at present. So what I tell them is, think about who you want to be and think of those traits. For a lot of business owners, they say, I need to be organized. I need to be inspirational. I need to be a leader. And I think it's incredibly important to understand the difference between being a human being and a human doing. Right? Very often as entrepreneurs, we feel we have to do a certain thing in order to be a certain way. And I challenge these business owners to think about, well, imagine if you were being those traits now, how that would change you and what would be different. And I think that's one of the best ways to overcome this imposter syndrome that often we experience, where we feel like we have to do something to be a certain way, and instead start to be those traits now to enable us to move forward.
So what do you see in age difference when it comes to, sorry, I guess I'll rephrase that a little bit. When you're working with different entrepreneurs, right? How does age difference play into this, right? So does a 26-year-old have the same issues and fears as a 40-year-old?
It's actually incredibly surprising that often the fears and patterns are incredibly similar no matter what the age. The difference is what they're focusing on and the difference in responsibilities, right? So often, for example, when I work with someone in their 30s, they're thinking, I need to have a business, but then I'm also scared. I want to make sure I have a family and I want to focus on that. And they feel like they're being pulled in different directions. A seasoned business owner in their 50s and 60s, they're thinking, can I take the risk? I need to look after my family. And often it's a very similar pattern, but the story changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does.
Yeah. So I think ultimately when we look into business owners and moving forward and actually stepping into that entrepreneurial journey, I think it's very important to figure out why you're going into entrepreneurship, because I see entrepreneurship as a vehicle to do what you want to do. And it's not just, I want to be an entrepreneur. Like, why is that? Is it you want time freedom? Is it that you want money? Is it that you want to have an impact? And I think it's very important to understand that you can go on that journey and figure out the reasons why. And also that you can stay at your job and be an entrepreneur and build it up on the side as you go through. And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to dive in. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that do. I know I did myself, but ultimately it's figuring out what's right for you.
So what's interesting here is that I saw a video of yours the other day about not having goals, or the way that we set goals now is relevant. So how does that play into what you've just said? Because obviously what you've just said is that you kind of need to have, maybe they're not goals, maybe they're ambitions, use whatever terminology you want. So how do you then, how do you bring those two together, those two concepts of knowing what you want to get to and then not having goals?
So what I mean by that in the video that I was sharing is that a lot of entrepreneurs set SMART goals, which is a system that's used for something that is in your control. For example, with athletes, when they can control everything, SMART goals make sense. Right. For an entrepreneur, there's so many different facets and uncertainties that if you actually set a SMART goal, what tends to happen is you could reach it, but at what cost? Like, it's going to sacrifice your health, your family, your relationships in the process. And especially when you start to set multiple goals in different areas, all with these SMART goals, it just ends up being a lot of pressure on yourself. So what I find is perhaps an even more impactful way to do it is to understand where you're heading, right? You've got the vision for your business and you understand where you're going towards. And then I challenge people to set power year targets where they think in a 3-month period, what do I want to achieve? Because 3 months is much more manageable for us as entrepreneurs, because usually we overestimate what we can do in a year. But 3 months is a much more manageable period of time for us to then move forward. And then within that, it's thinking about the systems that you can put in place to enable you to move forward, because systems make much more sense. Like, think about those micro goals of what could you do that you can be in control of that helps you move forward. So for example, some entrepreneurs will say, I need to make £5,000 a month. That's my aim. And okay, that's fantastic, but what's the prerequisite to that? How many sales calls? And then they say, I need to have 25 sales calls. Okay, so to get 25 sales calls, what do you actually need to do? And they'd say, probably reach out to 50 people a day. Okay, so that is your aim, 50 people a day. Whether you get 5 sales calls, 25, 100 is kind of irrelevant. Like, that is the action that you take that enables you to get there. And what I find is when entrepreneurs start to break their life and focus on those areas, what happens is they feel less pressure and they get better results because they're not just focused on one outcome and getting themselves stressed in achieving it.
I think that's what you've touched on there is an interesting topic, simply because it's breaking down your strategic goals, right? And it's because a lot of people will set high targets, but they will just never achieve them because they don't really understand what it means to have that target.
Yes.
So what you're really saying is actually that you want to have £5,000 a month or a certain lifestyle. This is what I want, a certain lifestyle. And actually, how do I break that down into real things that I do in order to get them done?
Yeah, most certainly. And I think it's simplifying it. Very often we have these big visions, but to make it a reality, there's a huge gap sometimes. So it's figuring out, how do you start that journey and what are those small targets you need to hit along the way that ultimately move you towards what it is that you desire.
So you traveled a lot and you've worked in different countries, right? So what do you see as the difference in the entrepreneurial lifestyle across the world, culturally or territorially? Is there a difference, or are we all the same breed?
I think ultimately when we look into different cultures and different ways in which entrepreneurs are grown out, I think that the outcome is very similar, but actually the practices and the cultures vary massively. For example, in China, there's a huge orientation on family. I mean, the reason behind it is a family, I want to look after them, like family is everything. In the Western culture, it's more of, I want to do this for myself, I want to be able to give back, but ultimately you're very much on this isolated island of this is me. Whereas in China, there's support from families, there's different facets there. In China, there's a big aspect of not losing face. So as in not doing something that could embarrass yourself and the family. So there's another facet there. In the Western side, it's more, take risks, make it happen. And it's slightly different. Even the way in which we speak about business in the US versus the UK, like there's a very big difference in the nuances and the language that we use around that. So when I think of the entrepreneur lifestyle and working with people, it's not saying this is the fix that you have to do. It's figuring out, as an entrepreneur, what is it that you want to create? And how could you live a lifestyle that enables you to sustainably achieve that whilst you are enjoying the process? So you're being productive, so you're getting stuff done, but also giving yourself that time off and creativity so you can work on other aspects of yourself as well.
So having spent a lot of time in China and obviously seeing the boom in China over the next God knows how many years now.
Yes.
What do you think they're doing differently? What do you think they're doing that they're doing well that we should be able to bring in to our own, not say culture, but ways of thinking here in the UK?
I actually think one of the biggest differences in China is the support network and the importance of connections and connecting with one another. For example, in China, you can't just arrive there and think that it's going to suddenly set up a business, right? It's about building those connections and building that foundation through time. And I think that in the West, that often there's this feeling of competition. We need to do this, we need to start doing it. And it's very much this impatient move, whereas in China, it's about building those strategic relationships that I find is very powerful. And I feel that in the West, if we started to perhaps focus on, I say West ultimately, outside of China, I think if we can start to focus on strategic relationships, building those bonds, what happens is it enables you to have other opportunities that other people don't have access to because they don't have that network.
So I think you're touching a little bit on the fail fast mentality that we have here, right? Well, yes. Not here, but it's in the US and Europe generally. Sure.
So I think fail fast mentality, I think it's fantastic. Obviously, the lean startup, there's loads of different methodologies, and I think that's incredibly important. What I'm stressing there is the importance of relationships along the way and having and building those connections strategically for the future. And one of the exercises that I often give people is the Dream 100 list of what are the 100 connections that you need that would enable you to take your life and your business to a new level. And if you start to build those connections now, what happens is it enables you to have, once again, opportunities that you wouldn't have otherwise.
And I guess there you're talking about, rather than individual people that types of personas that you want to link with, right? So if you're a service-based company, who owns the network of people that I'm trying to sell to, right? How do I get involved in that?
Yeah, most certainly. And I think that's where you're starting to think more strategically, as opposed to hustling every day and being in the grit of being busy.
So what about the US on the other side? So, I mean, obviously being in Silicon Valley, that's, you know, the home of all of this and
Yes.
all it began. So what do you think we can take from Valley's mentality over to the UK?
Well, I think ultimately when we look into Silicon Valley, I think one of the most important things that they stress, it's not about the idea, it's about execution. And it's about understanding the team. Anyone can have an idea, but it's about how you execute and how you start to move the business forward. And I think very often, especially nowadays, I see a lot of people focusing on building something. And this is a huge, a very common thing of building something that we hope the market will like, as opposed to testing it along the way and actually getting out there and connecting with people who are using the product. And I think that there's often that gap that I see in America where they are strategically like speaking to all their different clients and customers and constantly reiterating depending on what they want, as opposed to just focusing on building something and staying in the dark.
Yeah, I think that's, I've said this on another podcast where US investors always say to you that, you know, you can have a great idea with a rubbish team, but they'll all invest in a great team with a B class idea because they know that team can execute it. And if something goes wrong along the way, they'll have the ability to adapt and change.
Yeah, and the ability to adapt and change and pivot is probably the most important asset that any entrepreneur can have right now.
So one of my kind of pet hates, and I've been discussing this on other podcasts, is around a little bit around some of the commoditization of entrepreneurship, right? Because entrepreneurs have been from time immemorial, right? Since people have been, you know, bartering food, and that's been entrepreneurship, right? So, you know, my dad owned a newsagent. That he was an entrepreneur because he built a small business, and I think the way that we look at entrepreneurship with this kind of glorified, glamorized view is it's not there. And I think that some of the things where they fail fast, has brought a lot of short-termism into the ideology of running business now. And what I mean to say by that is that people think about, I want to get rich quick, and they're not really thinking about long-term of what they're trying to build and what they're trying to leave behind and their legacy.
Yes.
So have you seen anything similar to that? I mean, do you see that some cultures handling this better? Obviously, you said in China, it's more about the strategic thinking. But do you see that we're not doing it as well here? And there is that commoditization piece where people are thinking too much about the glamour and not of the substance of what they're trying to do.
I think that generally speaking, society has a depiction of what they believe success is like for entrepreneurs. And I think it's very challenging for entrepreneurs in general who are on that journey not to suddenly see that and want that. And I think that's a predisposition we have as a society to, that's how you get rich quick. And I feel that as often we see the last 100 meters of a race, we don't see like the thousands and thousands of meters an entrepreneur has spent along the way and on that journey. And I think ultimately when we look into the entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur, for me, really, it's that way of thinking in a different way and wanting something different for your life. And that's, I guess, where we go back to it being a vehicle. Now, if this is a vehicle for a short-term thing for you, yeah, that's okay. But ultimately, you know, nowadays, when we think as being an entrepreneur, and you mentioned it perfectly about that legacy, so many people now are starting to reconsider why they're doing what they're doing and what is the purpose, what is the greater meaning. I believe it's like 1 million podcasts or something like that have been released since the period of COVID, right? Just unreal of people wanting to give back and have an impact in a new way. And I think that is shifting our society to hopefully have this more long-term view of what it means to build everything up. And I do see a shift to that, although it certainly takes a long period of time for us to have that adjustment.
So you touched on your father's suicide, and I think mental health in entrepreneurship is kind of close to my heart because you know, it's even though you be surrounded by a team, it can be a very lonely world.
Yes.
Right. So how do you stay sane as an entrepreneur? I mean, what advice do you give you yourself? Like, what do you do in order to kind of make sure that you stay on track?
Yeah, sure, most certainly. The issue is, as an entrepreneur, the more successful you are, the more isolated it often becomes because you can't relate to as many people. And one of the things that I mentioned to entrepreneurs that helps keep me sane is about not having an externally linked identity. What I mean by this is linking who you are to the success of your business. Because what happens is it ties you to something that's outside of yourself. And often when you go through periods of challenges, for example, that many businesses are going through now, you don't have your self-worth that is tied to that. And that is a fantastic way to actually break away and figure out, you know, who you are. And then we look into the different facets of what it is to be an entrepreneur and the things you have along the way, like your health, figuring out your relationships, connecting with other people. And for me, that's an incredibly important way for me to stay grounded on my journey, to enable me to, yes, I'm working on the business and I'm enjoying that journey, but I'm also giving myself the ability to connect with other people. And what is incredibly important, I think, that so many entrepreneurs miss out on is about connecting authentically with other entrepreneurs in the space. Because the truth is, you chat to an entrepreneur, how's it going? Amazing. And then you say, okay, how's it really going? And that's genuinely where you have an opportunity for a connection, where you can be vulnerable. And very often as an entrepreneur, you have to be an optimist. And it's great that you're smiling and everything's moving forward. That's fantastic. You need that. But if you don't have the other side of things where you can actually authentically connect with someone and share what's going on, it's where you create these parallel worlds and you have these great highs, but it's also followed by these big lows. So being able to authentically connect, I found, is one of the best ways for me to stay sane, despite the grueling process that it is to be an entrepreneur.
No, I agree with you. I think one of the things you miss out with COVID are those networking events where, you'll go through the event and you'll meet a bunch of people, but then there's always a group of people that end up going for a beer afterwards. And that conversation is always very different from the one that you have within the room, right?
Yes.
And it's an interesting one. But you touched on something I want to kind of explore a little bit more, is around the highs and lows, right?
Yes.
Because they can be very high and they can be very, very low, right? So
yes.
How did you manage to even that out, right? And how did it, and not let it affect your external, like you say, relations with girlfriends, wives?
Yes. So ultimately for me, when I work with entrepreneurs, I speak about business boundaries and I speak about lifestyle principles. So what I mean by this, is there a cutoff time when you stop working? Like, you can hustle as much as you want, but don't take away tomorrow's energy today. And this is where we look about being sustainable. Because otherwise you can work so hard and you put so much pressure on yourself that you burn out. And I think one of the keys there that I think as entrepreneurs, it's very easy to forget, is about being grateful for what you have. Many entrepreneurs at the start of this year, myself included, you have some amazing goals. Suddenly it's flipped on its head. Yeah. And if you keep those same goals, you're going to feel so much pressure now because the world has shifted in ways we couldn't have fathomed at the beginning of the year. And I think ultimately it's that gratitude that can enable you to really understand how abundant you are, and you act and you react in a very different way when you're in that abundance mindset, as opposed to moving into this scarcity mindset. And when it comes to lifestyle principles, for me, they are non-negotiables that I have in my day, no matter what. So for some people, they'll schedule their work and they'll schedule other things outside of that. For me, I do it opposite. I want to schedule my personal time. When can I connect with my wife? When am I going to the gym? When am I finishing up for the day? And I schedule all that first so that I know I'm emotionally grounded. I'm looking after my health. And that helps me operate at an incredibly high level. So my energy is very high. So I can get more things done, but that's only because I've actively and been proactive with organizing those different areas of my life as I've started the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. I think Microsoft now in Outlook gives you this focus time calendar blocks, right? So you can actually sit there and make sure. And I think that's very important. I like the way that you flipped it on its head. I mean, I've been doing that for the last few months, where I block out time in my calendar like weeks in advance to know that that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm not going to be in meetings then. I need that time. Yeah. Otherwise. And again, one of the things I realized is that when you're rushing, as you said, every entrepreneur I have ever met is just running at 100 miles an hour. But you run at 100 miles an hour, you can't see anything. It's only when you slow down, drive at 5 miles an hour, can you enjoy the countryside, enjoy what's going on around you, and actually sit and think about, well, is this the right direction I want to go in? Should I not just stop here, take a break, and go?
Yeah, most certainly. And it reminds me of the phrase, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I think ultimately as entrepreneurs, if you can slow down and give yourself that break, it enables you to move forward in a very, very different way. One of the practices that I've been doing for the past couple of years, which is amazing, is about thinking time. And as an entrepreneur, we're always on the go, but scheduling time just to think about like one question in the business has enabled me to change how I do business like tenfold, because I'm actually spending time just to think and use my brain in a way where it is focused. It's one of the best habits.
So how do you make sure your mind doesn't wander? Because this is a thing I heard these years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe more. I was listening to an interview with the CEO of LinkedIn, and he says he has 2 4-hour slots in a week where he just sits and thinks.
Yes.
And I kind of laughed at him and thinking, what? But then when you're in it, you think, well, actually, you do need, but you need that time simply just to detach. But then how do you prevent yourself from allowing your mind to wander?
Yes, that's brilliant. So what I do is I sit with a question. So I have a series of questions that I ask myself. What am I missing? And I just focus on that one question, or what would happen? How could I 10x this year? Just as and that helps you think in different ways. So I just focus on that question. And for the first half an hour, I generally speaking write down the usual sort of thing. It's only in the last 15 minutes that I start to get some good ideas. And then I spend 10 minutes circling everything and figuring out what I could do. And then each Friday, so after this podcast as an example, I will then review if there's any good ideas there and anything I can actually implement moving forward.
Cool. So just because I realize we haven't touched on this, how do people get in touch with you? How do you engage with people? What services do you offer? What do you do for people?
Oh, sure. So there's a few different things. So I have the Entrepreneur Lifestyle Accelerator, which for me is a 6-month program that takes overwhelmed, stressed out entrepreneurs where they start to become more profitable in their business. They're becoming more productive, managing their energy, their emotional state, and they go through that and either with myself or one of my trainers. I do one-on-one coaching, and then I also have a practice where I help other coaches get started in the coaching field. So I certify them, I give them speaking skills, and then I help them build their business online.
So how does a program look? So it's six months, you said, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So how does that? Because it's a long period for any entrepreneur to take out. So how does that look?
Sure. So the reason why it's over 6 months is because I realize that entrepreneurs are busy and I don't want to throw a bunch of things at them. So the way I break it down is into different months is a different area that they're going to focus on. So for example, the first thing we look into their time freedom and their business vision and how they want to build their business and what lifestyle they want to live at the end of their business, but also as they build it. And we also look into decision making. I often find as entrepreneurs, there are decisions that haven't been made in the business that we're procrastinating on or off-putting. So that's where we tackle that straight away to figure out, are you heading in the right direction? Do you need to move in a different criteria in a different way? And then in month 2, we look into procrastination, productivity, and profit. And I always find it's fascinating the different ways in which us as entrepreneurs procrastinate. And I've got 6 types of entrepreneur procrastinators. And I think people enjoy figuring out which one they are and ultimately gaining tools to overcome that.
I think we do some things really quickly, and probably too quickly, and other stuff just you do it too slowly, right? I think that's there's no middle bit. There's never any middle bit.
Yeah, most certainly. So I've designed the program in a way that enables people to go through it in a way that works, where they gain the tools, they can focus on something each month, and then they get coaching along the journey to ultimately help them to move forward in a much more fluent and sustainable way. And we've had some amazing results with the program.
So how much do you have to deconstruct people?
Deconstructing people is of fundamental importance to figure out their psychology, right? So that's why you do it with coaching. And ultimately in the videos is all the techniques that I've had over the years that I've been doing and working with entrepreneurs of the best of the best that I find is incredibly important. So they go through, they understand frameworks, and then with a coach, they start to dive deeper into their own psychology to figure out where they have their blocks. Because the truth is, your business growth will never outgrow your personal growth. The business owner is very much the bottleneck stopping the business moving forward. So if we can help ease that, what happens is the business takes care of itself.
So I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent now.
Sure, let's
because
go.
there's a question I really want to ask you, simply because I've seen it in your LinkedIn profile that you were on Tony Robbins's course, and obviously everyone's heard about him. I guess most people on the planet should have heard about him by now, but I never really understood what he does. And so, so can you just explain a little bit about that? Like, what is that whole thing?
Sure. So I think for the listeners, the best way to really understand Tony is to watch the Netflix documentary, I'm Not Your Guru. Right. I think it gives you an understanding of who he is. I think Tony is a phenomenal being. Like, it's unreal what he does. And I think ultimately for him, it's understanding psychology and helping you move to a higher level. Get the edges is ultimately how he does it. He's worked with lots of different people. Really, I think that if you watch I'm Not Your Guru, I think that would give you a really good understanding about what he does. For him, it's figuring out like why you do what you do, how can you get more of what you do, and figuring out that process and closing that gap. He's honestly a phenomenal man.
So what did you learn out of that course? Because you did it, you certified, right? As a
Yeah. So I've done a bunch of Tony's stuff. I've volunteered at courses. So I've immersed myself in what he does because I think he does it very well. I think with anyone, there's pros and cons to what they do and what they teach. But I think ultimately, when I look at someone who has mastered psychology in human beings, I definitely look as Tony as one of the top there, and I can use a lot of those skills to then tailor that to entrepreneurs. So I've attended a variety of his different events, and I think ultimately it gives you an experience of what it's like to play at a higher level with different energy. It's kind of like a concert for personal development, but the best way is to, like I said, immerse yourself, watch that documentary. And I think that's probably going to be the best guide to understanding exactly what it's like attending an event and experiencing the emotions when he works with people.
So another bit of a random question.
Sure.
Non sequitur, as they say. China. So the TED Talk you did in Mandarin, how did that come about? And how long have you been learning Mandarin?
Sure. So I've been doing Mandarin for about eight years, something like that. Now, my Mandarin isn't actually that great. Like, it's okay, but if you told me to go on stage right now and do a talk, I would flop like no other, like just terrible, because I can understand the vocab, but to articulate myself in a way which conveys the message that I want is much more challenging. So when I was working out how to do this TEDx in Chinese, it took me about 3 months in preparation, and I actually learned the entire speech off by heart. And the reason why I did that is because I knew I couldn't go on the whim. And I remember swimming, doing exercise and literally reciting the speech in my head as I'm swimming, doing lengths of a pool. And one of the most challenging parts was actually linking my body language with what I was expressing. I remember saying, these 5 reasons, and then my hand would come up like 3 seconds later. It would just be completely off. But it was an amazing experience. And I actually remember, and obviously you could go watch this, maybe we'll put this in the show notes, but there's actually a moment where I completely forgot what I was saying in the TED Talk. So you can imagine, right, being on stage, hundreds of people watching me, and I'm just like, blank. And I remember, you could see it. I look at a member of the audience and I'm like, soy woman zama ban, which is basically like, what do we do now? And the guy's just like, I don't know. And I basically, then that acts as a trigger and I suddenly remember where I was going. So it moved on quite fluidly, but it was a really fantastic experience. The reason why I did it is because I wanted to connect with people in China in a way that they could really receive by speaking the language and ultimately having that emotional connection that I thought it being translated wouldn't have the same impact.
So what did it open up for you? I mean, what was the impact?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. Like, it's allowed me to gain a variety of different connections. It's enabled me to speak on lots of different platforms. I think it's quite a unique thing that not most people aren't used to. And when I train TEDx people now, because I've been training TEDx speakers for many years, it now gives me another depth of understanding that I didn't have previously to enable me to help them to better convey their message.
So yeah, that is one of the questions I wanted to ask you is what are your tips for public, if you got top 5 tips, what would they be for public speaking and say doing an event like TEDx?
Sure. So I think ultimately, if we were to fly through some tips, I think being able to convey your story is very important, but to actually take people on a journey and not just narrate it. The next thing I'd say is that to be very aware of the body language that you use to convey your message and to make sure that you're using it in a way that really impacts an audience. Next, I'd say that if you look into the future and the past of human beings, right? Just an example, if I told you to point to your future, where would you point?
Yeah.
As an example, where would it be for you?
Oh man, that's a hard question. I would say on a beach somewhere, but no, really the idea.
Okay, sure. But like, if you could point to it, like physically, like where would you point? Would it be right, left, center?
Straightforward, I guess.
Okay, cool. So most people are straightforward, slightly to the right. Generally, it's there. When we go to past, it's back and to the left. So why is that important? On stage, it's opposite for you and your audience. So what that means is when you start to say, look forward to your future, you're actually looking to their past. And this is where you can unconsciously influence someone to do something different. So that's, again, like another cool little tip. A couple of others I would say is the stereotypes of being able to use your voice in an effective way. What I mean by this is that most people don't take breaks. They don't stop speaking to allow an audience to really understand what they're saying. And that's incredibly powerful to actually stop. And the last thing I'd say is eye contact. when I'm on stage, even if there's hundreds of people, I will make sure I make eye contact with different people, and then I move over to someone else. And it's a series of mini conversations. This enables you to keep contact with an audience, to enable you to have that feeling and that energy where everyone feels connected with you.
Excellent. Right. So I always have the last question I ask is always the same to everyone
Sure.
that comes on the podcast. If you could go back in time 20 years and give advice to your younger self, what would that advice be?
I think when I think back of 20 years time going back to my younger self, I think it would be pretty simple, and that is that in patience, time, like, things will come. And the reason why I say in patience things will come is that even for myself and for a lot of people I speak to nowadays, we're in a process of instant gratification where we constantly want things immediately. And it's because we pretty much can get things instantaneously, be it Amazon boxes, or in China they've got Olamar, or like pretty much anything you want comes a click of a button. Whereas the things that matter most in life, we actually require a lot of patience for: building a successful career, building deep connections, finding love, working on your health. And I think that ultimately patience is something that is incredibly important, that I keep reminding myself of now, and is something that I wish to keep in my life as I continue.
That's very interesting. Well, Ben, how do people find you? How do they want to if they want to get in contact with you?
Sure. So they can connect with me on my website. So ben-ivey.com, I-V-E-Y. I'm not a plant. And then they can download different models that I have. I know that overwhelm is a big thing that people are stressing about right now. So ben-ivey /overwhelm. I've got some different hacks that people can download for free to overcome that.
Excellent. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, and if you like what you hear, then please subscribe to the Atom Ventures podcast, or just come to atomcto.com and you'll learn more about myself and what we do. Thanks, man.
Amazing.